to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at RhodeIslandFoundation.org.
Welcome to another segment of In Another Opinion, a public information program where our discussions are focused on the communities of color in the state of Rhode Island. I'm your host, Peter Wells. My guest today is Congressman David Cicilline of the 1st Congressional District of Rhode Island. Today's topic, the state of Rhode Island and our country under the Trump administration. David, let's get right into this. In your opinion, what's the future of Rhode Island's health program if Donald Trump is successful in reducing the cost-sharing program with the states?
Well, if the president reduces the cost sharing, it will really undermine the success of the Affordable Care Act. It will drive up premiums. It will make it more difficult for people to access the healthcare system. There have been a number of reports that said that premiums would go up as much as 20% if that happens. So we have to really hold the administration's feet to the fire to be sure they follow the law, provide the cost sharing that is included in the law, so that more and more Rhode Islanders and more Americans can have access to quality, affordable health care.
So do you think that for the most part the health care program in Rhode Island that was fitted by Obamacare will stay in place?
Well, I mean, the Affordable Care Act has been incredibly successful here in Rhode Island, and we have the lowest rate of uninsured Rhode Islanders in a very long time. That has not been the experience everywhere in the country, and I think what Democrats have been willing to say to this administration is work with us to improve, to make the Affordable Care Act work even better. But the Republicans, and led by this president, have been committed to repealing it in its entirety. Their last proposal would have thrown 22 million people off their health insurance, would have increased premiums, increased out-of-pocket expenses, and ultimately, I think because of the power of the American people, calling and writing and showing up and saying, don't repeal the Affordable Care Act, work together to make it work better, that effort was defeated. But I expect when we return in September, the Republicans are going to go at it again. And what we have to do is really protect the Affordable Care Act, protect what works in it, but be willing to work with Republicans to make it work even better, to address some of the issues that exist. It's a complicated bill. It's not perfect, but it's done a lot to transform the lives of Rhode Islanders because they have access to health care. We should never go back to the days when millions and millions of Americans don't have access to health care.
No, I agree. I'd be remiss if not bringing up this subject, considering last weekend we saw such a horrific problem in Charlottesville, Virginia. What's your opinion on Donald Trump's handling of the Charlottesville protesters? Well,
I think, like most Rhode Islanders, when I saw the events unfold in Charlottesville, I was sickened and furious that in 2017, in an American city, that we would see a group of neo-Nazis, KKK, white supremacists, carrying torches reminiscent of the Nazi period or the Jim Crow period. And then to see the President of the United States not respond immediately in clear and unequivocal terms, condemning these hate groups, condemning this domestic terror, recognizing that 3 lives were lost in this, and saying this is not America, this does not represent our values, these hate groups are not welcome in this country, and condemning them in unequivocal and clear terms and assigning responsibility for this violence where it belonged. The president gave a response which suggested, both sides, there are many sides to this. There are not many sides.
No.
There's a side filled with hate and led by the KKK and white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and there's the rest of the American people standing up against that, some who actually were brave enough to go there and stand up against it in person. There are no many sides to this. And then the president was sort of over several days so condemned by Republicans and Democrats to respond in the appropriate way. He finally delivered some words condemning those hate groups. But then, the following day in a press conference went back to his original position that some of these were very fine people and there was fault on both sides. And that is just not true. And we needed in that moment to hear from the President of the United States in the strongest, most direct way, with no ambiguity, that hate groups like the KKK, white supremacists and neo-Nazis who caused this violence are not welcome in any American city. And, you know, it's complicated by the fact that the President of the United States has people like Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller in his administration, people with deep and long and documented ties to these movements and these groups. Steve Bannon, who made his name by running Breitbart, you know, which was a platform for the alt-right and for bigotry and racism and anti-Semitism. So they're in the administration, they're in the White House. So, you know, I've called on the president to remove those three people. I think it would send a powerful message, you know, get them out of the administration at a minimum. But the president, you know, displayed, I think, a tremendous lack of moral leadership in the way he responded to that very sickening and horrifying event in this country.
Well, you know, just to stay on the subject for a second, Steve Bannon, and rightfully, as you suggested, his connection to that group, that element in this country. What is his hold, do you think, on the president? And I say that, I mean, I understand he's supposed to be the conduit to this particular base that they're referring to. But it seems to me that even Donald Trump, as successful as he's been in contracting over the years, should be able to disconnect himself once he's made his connection with this particular group. Well, why Steve Bannon?
Well, I mean, you know, it's hard to know, but let's not forget the context of this. You know, the context of this is that we have a president who, and I don't take pleasure in saying all this, but these are the facts. This is a president who led the birther movement to try to delegitimize the first African-American president and claim he wasn't a United States citizen. Long history of denying rental properties to African-Americans. A person who said a judge shouldn't preside over his case because he was of Mexican descent. A person who, you know, hires these individuals. So, you know, it's in that context that you have to look at the statements of President Trump, and I don't think a lot of people were surprised. I think disappointed again, but you look at sort of this history here, and Steve Bannon, you know, the words of David Duke and the KKK newspaper praising the president for his response and saying he didn't condemn us. And David Duke being at the rally saying, we're here because we're supporting President Trump and the agenda the president's put forth. So if a person heard that as the president of the United States, you think the first response would say, if you're doing this in my name, stop doing it.
Sure.
I do not, you know, want you to represent me. Those don't reflect my values. That would be your immediate kind of natural reaction. And sadly, that's not what we saw from the president of the United States. And so it doesn't give me any pleasure to say that. He's the president of the United States. And I wish it weren't the case that he was so unwilling to strongly condemn these hate groups and to have people so closely aligned with him in his administration.
Yes. It's saddening. It really is. Well, let's move to another subject. North Korea. Of course, the newspapers and the press suggest from reporting that the concern is Guam and South Korea for any immediate strike on the part of North Korea. But my question is this. Are we safe on the North American shores of the US of A against missiles or the like from North Korea?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is this is a very serious situation. We have to do all that we can, working in close consultation with our international partners to prevent North Korea from having the ability to deliver a nuclear weapon either to the United States or to any of our allies in their region. The reason this is such a great challenge is there's not actually a good military option, because even if we were able to strike the nuclear sites in North Korea, which would be difficult, North Korea could launch immediately even conventional weapons into South Korea, where there's a huge population center, and cause the death of a significant number of people, maybe over, maybe in the millions. So there's not, and that's not even considering the use of nuclear weapons. So there's not a good military option. There's also not a great diplomatic option, because Kim Jong-un needs the United States as his foil. Part of the way he explains to the North Korean people why life is so hard, why they're starving, why there's no economy there, is the United States, the big bad United States. So having a resolution in which somehow he comes to terms with the United States, he'll lose the explanation, and then the North Koreans will say, well, why isn't our life gotten any better? So he sort of needs this foil. Further complicated by the Chinese, who really have the ability to help put an end to the threat of the nuclear program of the North Koreans, because they're really the principal resource and supplier for the North Koreans. Most of the trade comes from China. China is in an unusual position because on the one hand, they don't want Kim Jong-un to begin a nuclear war because that would be devastating for them.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, the other thing they're really terrified of is a unified Korean peninsula where the North and South become one, allied with the West right on their border. So the Chinese want just enough tension to keep the peninsula divided and to keep North Korea at bay, but not enough unrest to cause the North Koreans to do something stupid. So I think it's a very complicated situation. It's going to require very strong diplomatic efforts, continuing sanctions. The president was successful, I'll give him credit. At the UN, Nikki Haley was successful at least in imposing some very good sanctions. We passed sanctions as well in Congress. We've got to ratchet those up, put economic pressure on the North Koreans, isolate them further, and work with the diplomatic, our international community for diplomatic resolution that will prevent them from ever using nuclear weapons. This has to be a top priority. What I worry about is the kind of bellicose language of the president, which seems to be ratcheting this conflict up. We're used to the North Korean dictator speaking that way, Kim Jong-un and his father before him. We've sort of, come to expect that. We have not come to expect that from the president of the United States. And what we need in a moment such as this is turn down the rhetoric, be smart about the diplomatic effort, work with our international partners to isolate and sanction and make it more difficult for North Korea to continue, and force China to make a different calculation about what they should be doing to prevent this from happening. But the rhetoric and the kind of hyperbolic statements make it more likely we could stumble into a conflict which would be devastating for the world. So I hope the president will tone down the rhetoric.
Yeah, China's key, I agree. And quite frankly, on the one hand, during the campaign, he was blasting China for its steel and its manufacturing deficiencies that they were sending here, and now just the other day, he's going after them again. By the same token, he's trying to ask them to help.
Right, which seems like not a great strategy in this moment to start a trade investigation. That's a real issue. I've been a big proponent of going after China for their currency manipulation. Just might be that you want to deal with this international crisis first and then do some of that later. So some of the timing seems
no strategy.
Not wise, yeah.
Jeez. Oh, well. David, in your opinion, regarding the special counsel and the activities going on with the Russia investigation, some people would say that he's demonstrated enough activity so far to actually obstruct that investigation. What say you?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is this is a very serious investigation. There are obviously both House and Senate Intelligence Committees conducting their own investigations. Robert Mueller, as the special counsel, has put together a very serious team that are looking at this, and it's a wide-ranging investigation, including whether or not the president has attempted to obstruct justice. Those are very serious charges. What I think we have to do at this point is be certain that those investigations have the resources they need to be done properly and thoroughly, and that they are protected from any political interference. Robert Mueller is a serious guy. I think he is not going to allow politics to play in any way in this, and he's going to insist on doing this in a professional and thorough way. I think the president's effort to encourage the FBI director to sort of let Mike Flynn go and leave the investigation alone is very disturbing. The fact that he cleared the room, made that statement, and thereafter fired Jim Comey, Director Comey, I think are very problematic, and I know those are issues that Robert Mueller is looking at. I think we need to let these investigations unfold. I think one of the real tragedies of all of this is that this is a White House that is consumed with scandal and investigations and conflicts of interest inquiries, all very serious. But as a result of it, we're not getting the work done for the American people. We haven't seen a jobs bill. We haven't seen an infrastructure bill. We haven't moved on any legislation to make college affordable. We haven't done anything to address our energy policy. There are major, serious things we should be doing to raise people's incomes, to reduce the cost in people's lives, to prepare people for the jobs of the 21st century. None of that is getting done because there's no leadership coming from the White House, and the Republicans in the House and the Senate are responding to the daily events of this White House rather than focusing on the urgent needs of the American people. So there's a real cost to this show, and it's that we're not getting the work done that's so important to Rhode Island families, to hardworking people in this state that want to see some progress on issues that matter in our country.
Yeah, you know, and it does appear that every time that the president has a press conference with some manufacturing or a company giant, they talk about the jobs that are coming, but none of these jobs are here.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things that the president has not done, and what we know just from our kind of study of the economy is, you know, building an economy and building an economy, one of the things I'm very focused on is manufacturing, helping to rebuild Rhode Island manufacturing so that we can make things in this country and export American-made goods, not American jobs. There are about 30 or 40 bills that are part of a Make It in America agenda. Several of them are mine in the Congress of the United States. We need to put in place policies that support manufacturing in our country, create a level playing field. The idea of sort of tweeting about one company and encouraging them or bullying them to do this or that, that's not economic policy that is sustainable. And so, you know, what we need is a little less show and a little more substance. You know, work with the Congress of the United States to enact real policies, you know, end tax breaks that we give companies that ship American jobs overseas, and instead give those tax breaks to companies in the U.S. I have a bill that does that, as does Senator Whitehouse in the Senate. So there are a number of things we could be doing to create a level playing field. The president doesn't seem to be serious about working with Congress to change some policies that will actually support the growth of American manufacturing. He just disbanded yesterday his manufacturing council when people began to resign from it. So we need some real substance. People need to see some effort, not just a one-off here or there, but some changes in policy that are going to support good manufacturing jobs in this country.
Well, it's true. I mean, and his mantra, his whole campaign was on jobs, and we still haven't seen those jobs. It seems to me the people that were supporting him and most dependent on him making that campaign promise should be opposed to what he's doing. And quite frankly, he hasn't really embraced Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sad part is that many of the people who voted for President Trump on the expectation that he was going to focus on hardworking families who've been forgotten in this economy, who have seen their wages remain stagnant and so much of the growth happen at the top. He spoke about those things, but I think what they found now is that he said that during the campaign in an effort to kind of win their support, but the policies that he's been fighting for in Washington are just the opposite. The first thing he tried to do is take away their health care. Then there was an effort to take away time and a half for people who work overtime, time and a half pay. Efforts to give tax breaks to the richest people in this country at the expense of working people. And so I think over time what they're seeing is that Donald Trump's actually not on their side. And although he uses language and makes that case, the policies that he and the Republicans in Washington are fighting for are to help people who have already made it, people who have already achieved great success at the expense of hardworking people in this country.
It's unbelievable that that his constant harassment of the press as fake news has really had an impact on the American people and the public as to what to believe today, unfortunately. And with the internet, where anyone can make news, it makes it even more difficult. Just out of curiosity, if you were pointing to yourself, if you were pointing to a medium, which medium would you say is the most successful in reporting accurately?
Other than your show?
Other than my show.
No, I think you're absolutely right, though. The president, and sadly, this is something we've seen throughout the history of the world. You know, when people try to undermine important institutions that hold them accountable, like the media and the courts, you should be very suspicious. I mean, those are two institutions that we rely on to litigate claims and to hold people accountable and to honor the Constitution and rule of law of our country. And so the courts are important, that we respect them and that they operate. And the same thing with the media. It plays a really important role. Our First Amendment, ensuring that we have a democracy that survives. And the president has attempted, and his administration in some instances, to undermine both of those institutions so that when he makes a false claim or lies to the American people and it's pointed out by the media, they can dismiss it as fake news. That is a very dangerous development. And I think we have, you know, it's important for people to develop good media literacy where you can understand what are reliable, credible sources of information, whether it be, you know, newspapers or television or internet sites, People need to do some work to be sure that they're getting accurate information and that it's reliable, and it requires more action and a more active citizenry to do that. And in the old days, we're both old enough, we're
Yes.
3 major networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS. There was nightly news. They gave it to you, and you could take it to the bank. There are still nightly news, which I think still are very reliable sources of information, but there's a lot of places that are competing, who are sharing information, some of it true, some of it not, and people have a responsibility to develop the skills to be able to sift through that and be able to determine what's accurate and what's not. And in this world of social media and so much information, it's easy to be overloaded with stuff and not be able to distinguish what's true and not. We should be encouraging the ability to do that and not throwing out more fake stuff, more dishonest stuff, and telling people, oh, you don't know what to believe. There are reliable sources like the Washington Post and New York Times and CBS that are, have a long established record of being reliable sources of information that people have a right to rely on.
Yeah, and I would also add PBS is a good location
Absolutely.
too. Listen, we're going to run out of time, but I want to ask you, what's going on in the front with we talk about Trump and the Republicans. What's happening with the Democratic Party? What are we up to?
Well, I was recently, in January, elected as one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee, along with Hakeem Jeffries in New York and Sherry Bustos of Illinois, 3 very different districts, charged with developing the Democratic agenda for the Congress and our long-term message for Democrats. We just launched, along with the Senate, a better deal, better jobs, better wages for a better future, an economic agenda that really focuses on raising people's incomes, creating good-paying full-time jobs, reducing the costs in people's lives, everything from health care to child care to prescription drugs, and then making sure folks are prepared with the skills necessary for the jobs of the 21st century. We're going to be releasing over the next several months very specific proposals in each of these areas, but it's really about focusing on hardworking people who have not seen their incomes rise, making sure people make more money, can hold on to more of it, make sure the costs in their lives are reduced, and making sure they're prepared to hold on to the jobs they have and also to have jobs for in the future in this very rapidly changing economy of the 21st century. Democrats are really committed to addressing the economic anxiety that folks feel. We're always going to stand for the values of civil rights and equality and women's health care and all the things that have been traditionally important to Democrats. But you're going to hear a lot of focus on economic anxiety, creating good-paying jobs, raising people's incomes, dealing with the creeping monopolization where people are losing power in the marketplace because of these mega mergers where prescription drugs keep going up because we don't allow the government to negotiate discounted prices in Medicare. We're going to change that. So it's a very focused economic agenda really to address the concerns of hardworking families all across our country.
Well, that sounds good. Let me ask you a question. What's the chances of Democrats getting control of the House?
I think Democrats will take the House back in 2018. We typically win 24 seats on average when we're out of power, House, Senate, and White House, which is exactly the number we need to win. I think that the American people are looking for a new direction for our country. The president has a historically low approval rating, I think because in part he's not speaking and doing things that matter to hardworking families. There was a lot of that discussion in the campaign, but they're seeing that he actually didn't mean it and he's not doing things to improve the lives of hardworking people in this country. And so the Democrats, I think, have a bold answer to that with a set of very specific proposals. We are fielding great candidates. We're going to run a very competitive campaign. And I think this will be the first opportunity people have to respond to what the president has offered in his administration. I think the American people are going to reject it and say that is not the direction we want to take our country. And they're going to want to invest in really rebuilding the middle class of this country, protecting access to health care, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, get folks back to work, and really allow families to see some of the economic prosperity that big corporate special interests have seen for a very long time.
And if that is the case, do we see Nancy Pelosi? I know she's a friend of yours. Does she get the reins again?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of talent in the Democratic caucus, a lot of great emerging new leaders. I don't know whether Leader Pelosi would stay after the next election or not. Obviously, she'll make that decision. But we've got a lot of great talent. I think you're going to see a lot of new faces in the Democratic Party over the next year, and I think that's great for our party.
Now, looking across the hall, what do you think about the Senate?
I don't have as much knowledge about kind of the electoral chances of the Senate. I know they're going to run very competitive campaigns, and I think, a lot of it depends on the standing of the president in a midterm. And I think if the president continues to behave in the way he's behaving and continues to fail to produce, real results for the American people, that we'll have a chance to take back both chambers.
Well, one of the things I'd like to do while I have you here is to congratulate you and the rest of the congressional delegation here in Rhode Island. The four of you have done a lot of work. You've done it together. There hasn't been a lot of rift as it is in other places and states. And I think the state of Rhode Island has prospered because of that. I see the reports of the dollars that are coming in from your office, from your efforts, and from Jack Reed's efforts, and of course Sheldon and Jim. So as a Rhode Islander, I'd like to say thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thanks. I mean, we're really lucky. We have a close delegation. We work together on almost everything, and I think as a result, we punch above our weight. We bring back more federal resources probably than a lot of folks in a lot of places, because we really do work very closely on behalf of Rhode Island. And I'm really honored to work with Senator Whitehouse, Senator Reed, and Congressman Landry, and great colleagues all working really hard for Rhode Island.
Yeah, and listen, I hope that we don't continue to lose population, so we don't lose a seat.
Yeah, we want more folks to move to Rhode Island so we can continue to have two
Absolutely.
members of Congress.
David, listen, we've just about run out of time, and unless do you have anything you'd like to just throw out?
No, I would say that, I think one of the things that I've been really heartened about since the election is the number of people that have become more deeply engaged in the civic life of our state and of our country. People, I think, understand that if our democracy is going to survive and prosper, it's going to require the active participation of citizens in ways maybe that they haven't done before. And people are writing and calling and making sure their views are heard, and I think that's really valuable. I think at the end of that, we're going to end up in a stronger, better place because of the active participation of lots of Rhode Islanders and people all across this country. And so I just encourage your viewers to keep on.
Well, listen, we do appreciate it. We appreciate your work.
Thanks.
And good luck to you in 18.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We've run out of time, but I want to thank today's guest, Congressman Cicilline from the 1st Congressional District, and for you, the viewers, for tuning in to another segment of In Another Opinion. A special thanks to Rhode Island PBS and for making this program possible. I'm your host, Peter Wells. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at inanotheropinion@gmail.com, and have a great day.
The Rhode Island Foundation, partnering with passionate Rhode Islanders to lead, transform, and inspire our state. Learn more at rhodeislandfoundation.org.